We're continuing to watch shares of Qualcomm this morning after the company slashed its forecast for smartphone shipments and gave a gloomier sales outlook. For more, let's bring in TECHnalysis Research President, Chief Analyst Bob O'Donnell. Bob, great to speak with you as always here. All right, when we come out of this quarter and really kind of back out what they had to say and really look through the core fundamentals of the business, but also the trends and the headwinds that are persisting for them, what really sticks out to you?
Look, Qualcomm has been on a journey of changing into a much broader company for several years now, really, but we're really starting to see it come into play. But the fact of the matter is 56% of their revenue this last quarter was for smartphones, right? That's still a huge chunk. And that's why there's been so much focus on, their numbers and their expectations. But as with the PC market, we're seeing that the smartphone market is taking this post-pandemic dip. And it's going to be difficult. There's a bunch of inventory out there, just as, again, we've seen with the PC guys. There's a lot of similarities in terms of what's been happening out there on that front. But they did have that automotive analyst day a couple of weeks ago in New York talking about all the automotive business they have. Of course, they're providing the chipset for Meta's new VR headsets. They're doing a number of areas because what they're able to do is leverage the technology they have, particularly around things like modems and RF and stuff that's really, really hard to do as Apple is learning, and apply that in a number of places. They've had this in automotive for a long time, what's called the telematics systems. And they've been driving that for a long time. Now, as they have more advanced processors that originally started in the smartphone market, they're bringing that into the automobile market. And, as we move to software-defined cars and much more capabilities, Qualcomm is saying, hey, look, you've been working with us for a long time anyway. We're a natural entree for you to bring some of these advanced capabilities to digital cockpit, to the Snapdragon Ride format that they have, or platform, that they have. So, it's a typical thing with semiconductors. Right now, short term is pretty tough for just about all of them. Longer term, those companies that have really diversified themselves, I think, have a really strong growth story. Qualcomm is one among them. AMD, of course, similar type of situation. They just reported earlier this week as well.
Bob, when does this correction in the level of inventory, when does that ease and start to improve?
Brian, they've said, in the call, they said it's going to be several quarters to get through that inventory. And again, we're hearing relatively similar types of things from some of the other big semi folks. So I think that's just a reflection of the fact that, again, a lot of people are slowing down the pace with which they upgrade their smartphones. Let's think about it. We're not seeing a whole lot of innovative smartphone designs. Everything is much more incremental. We've had a few big jumps with foldables, but they're still a small piece of the market. iPhones are evolving, but again, modest pace. So there isn't that overwhelming sense, I have to have the latest new great smartphone. Now, there's still plenty of upside for 5G smartphones. That's of course where Qualcomm's strength has typically been. So I think you're going to see them continue to develop that market, but it's just going to be at a slower pace, and people are going to have to get used to that in the short term, remembering that there's still those long-term opportunities.
Bob, hey, it's Julie here. I have to wonder about the implications for Apple, right? Because we keep getting these signs that smartphone sales are going to weaken. Qualcomm is just the latest. Apple shares today are down more than 3%. And I'm curious how long you think this pain is going to last for the smartphone market.
Hey, look, Julie, I think it could be a while. I think, we could be, again, drawing analogies to the PC market, maybe not declining quite as rapidly because PCs grew even more during the pandemic and therefore, unfortunately, are falling even more. But smartphones did reasonably well during the pandemic. But again, people are like, okay, I'm good for a while. And the average lifetimes we've seen growing over time. And now that's really kind of hitting. And when people have to make a decision, if things get tough from a macroeconomic perspective, they're like, hey, look, my phone is good. And, it's getting easier to get them repaired if you just want to replace the glass, of course, because people do that all the time. So I just don't feel like there's this compelling desire until we start to see something really dramatically different in the smartphone market. And again, we have seen foldables like the Galaxy Fold and some other things, but they're still small. Eventually, I think Apple may do something like that. That'll add some pizzazz to the market, but I still think we're a few years off. But to Apple's challenges that you mentioned, they bought Intel's modem IP. That's the chip that allows you to do the communications with the cellular network. And it's hard stuff. I mean, RF, as the radio frequency stuff, is very difficult. There's really only two companies in the world that do it well. It's Qualcomm and MediaTek. And Apple, had plans to do their own modem, and they still will. It's just that now they've already delayed it a year, and who knows if it goes even longer. So that's upside for Qualcomm that nobody expected to happen, so good for them, but offset, of course, by the fact that the overall market is still declining.
If the metaverse takes off, is Qualcomm a net beneficiary?
Yes, it is. It is. I mean, because there are, when we think about at least the near-term metaverse, I mean, longer term, we'll see. But near term, they've got the chip that's powering the headsets. Again, there are a couple other competitors, but Qualcomm by far is more advanced in that regard. But, look at it now even, right? I mean, they put that in their IoT revenue, and it's still a small fraction of Qualcomm's revenue. So even if it explodes, it becomes a reasonable percentage of Qualcomm's revenue, but nothing compared to smartphones, which to me is just another example and reason why I think the metaverse, as some people have touted it, is a long way off.
Bob O'Donnell, President and Chief Analyst at TECHnalysis Research. Always good to see you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me.